Okay, so we're starting the third week webinar live session for the Audencia MOOC on CSR and value creation. I have a pleasure today to introduce the topic relating to CSR in supply chains, CSR and sustainability in supply chains. And I'm very pleased that we have two guests joining us today. So we have Lesley Sander from SODEXO. She will introduce herself in a couple of minutes. And we have Alina Chircu from BENTLEY in the United States. Again, an expert within the area of supply chain. So we'll be broadcasting this session through YouTube. So if as a participant you wish to ask us questions, then what you need to do is use the chat function in the YouTube box underneath the video, and what will happen is I will receive those questions and I'll select some of those questions to ask our guests for today. So I'll hand over briefly to our two guests to introduce themselves and why sustainability in supply chain is relevant to what they do, and then we'll ask them a couple of questions to get the discussion going. So Lesley.
Thank you very much, Joe. I have two main responsibilities in SODEXO. I'm in charge of our extra financial reporting for the group, and also for our responsible sourcing initiatives. In terms of why SODEXO is really involved with responsible sourcing, our company was founded in 1966. And we, at that time, already established ourselves a twofold mission. We contribute to the quality of daily life of all of the people that we serve throughout the world, and we contribute to the economic, social, environmental development of the communities where we work. And obviously, supply chain makes a big contribution to both of those parts of our mission. And also we have a set of company values which include integrity, and again making sure that our supply chain is integral is also a very key part of that. Based on those company values, in 2009 we set out our corporate responsibility roadmap, which is called the Better Tomorrow Plan. Within that corporate responsibility roadmap, we have 18 different commitments, which include 4 specific responsible sourcing commitments, but also many other commitments where supply chain is directly involved. And so within the sourcing function, we work considerably on achieving the whole of our company's corporate responsibility roadmap. In terms of my own background, I've been with SODEXO now for 20 years. I started out in kind of like a straight supply chain role, if you like, supply chain coordination, bringing buyers together to buy across geographies, and then on supply chain optimization initiatives. And I moved on to corporate responsibility in 2008.
Great. Just a bit of clarification, perhaps, for those people who are not so aware of SODEXO. I mean, in Europe, I think most people will have seen the brand across numerous different types of activities, but maybe you could just outline very quickly the main business areas.
Yes, so SODEXO is present in 80 countries today. We mainly work on a business that we call on-site, so we will provide quality of life services for our clients on their premises. So it might be a company where we're providing the company restaurant as well as some cleaning, mailroom, reception type services. It can be a hospital, it can be a school, it can be a prison, it can also be very prestigious events like Ascot or the Lido in Paris, things like that. Then we have a second activity, which is called benefits and rewards, which is about providing basically services to allow people to have access to services. So the most typical example is our restaurant vouchers activity. So an employer will buy from us restaurant vouchers, which he will then provide to his employees, and the employees can then use those vouchers to go to a restaurant or to buy fruit from a supermarket. That type of thing. There's a number of other initiatives behind that, but that's probably the best known one. And our third activity is providing individual services to people at home, and that's around three pillars. It's around childcare. It's around helping seniors at home, and it's around providing concierge services within a corporate environment. So we might provide dry cleaning service, a service to help people book restaurants, theatre, holidays, sort out their administrative things like having passports or their car or repaired, or or things like this. So all to get a better quality of and a personal, professional life balance.
Fantastic, great, that's really helpful. And I think what's really interesting about your organisation and you being here today is that typically in our supply chain courses, we use manufacturing examples to talk about flow, etc. But the service sector is very, very important. It's a very significant part of most economies, especially developed economies. So it's really interesting to get some insights from that area that we don't really draw on enough, I think, in the courses that we teach. So thank you very much for that. So Alina?
Hello, my name is Alina Chircu. So I'm an associate professor and chair in the Information and Process Management Department at Bentley University. I teach supply chain topics in our MBA programs, and I also do research on supply chain processes and technologies. I think sustainability is interesting for me because I start in all of my courses with a value chain perspective. A perspective that includes not just your manufacturing processes, your suppliers and your customers, but also all the other entities that either participate or help you deliver products to your customers, or entities that are affected by your processes and your interactions with your suppliers and customers. And so from that perspective, sustainability becomes very interesting and can be defined, and its impact for the entire ecosystem can be defined by much better than by focusing them on just a supplier process.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so to kick off the discussion, what I'm suggesting we do is treat these couple of discussion questions that we've had within the MOOC discussion area. So I've had a little bit of interaction with some of the MOOC participants already around these questions. So I thought it'd be really interesting to get the insights from our two guests on these, just to get a different perspective, perhaps. So so the first question really relates to the way that supply chain is defined by companies, so how far they view the supply chain in terms of reach, etc., and how companies react to issues within their supply chain. And the second sort of question, which comes out of the discussion board that we have in the MOOC, is relating to how companies can create value by integrating sustainability into their supply chains. And that can be related to, I gave some examples in the course relating to green logistics, relating to closed-loop supply chains, for example. But there are many other opportunities for the way that companies can create value by integrating sustainability within their supply chain strategies. So, Lesley, what's your view on the way that SODEXO in particular views its supply chain, identifies issues, and thinks about integrating this from a value perspective?
Okay, that's a very, very broad question. I'll try and answer it as best I can. In terms of the way that we look at our supply chain, we really try to take an end-to-end view. So we're very much focused at being kind of in the lower half of the supply chain, I guess, but not right at the very end, in the sense that we are obviously purchasing products in order to be able to provide our services, and that puts us already at the end of a very long supply chain. If you take a product like seafood, for example, you have the fishing boats that are catching the fish, probably taking them to some kind of a processing plant. Then that plant will be providing the raw material to some kind of a manufacturer or a producer, who will then be delivering it into a distributor, and that distributor will then be delivering those products in what we call the downstream part of our supply chain, which is when the products go from the distributors out to our 32,000 client sites across the world. So it's actually a very complex supply chain, but we try to deal with it end to end, because a lot of the responsible sourcing issues that come up really require that that investment. Obviously, our own intervention is very focused around our direct suppliers, because that's where we have the greatest interaction and the greatest influence. But we really try to work with our suppliers to help them go upstream and have an impact upstream, and I can give some examples of that as necessary. And we also try to work downstream to make sure that we're as efficient as possible. We distribute our product out to our sites. In terms of what kind of value does it bring to work on sourcing, you mentioned cost. I would say in most cases that's actually our primary driver. We have many other aims when we work on responsible sourcing. It's about securing supply for the future. Obviously, in our resource-strapped, climate-stricken environments, we really need to work on securing supply for the future. That's extremely important for us. It's about managing risk, especially including reputational risk. It's about driving innovation, because when we work on responsible sourcing, often it leads us to conversations that we wouldn't otherwise have with suppliers, and that brings new ways of working, innovation. It's about driving employee engagement, because very often, and particularly the younger generations, are looking for companies which are involved in corporate responsibility in general, but are often quite focused on what we do in terms of the responsibility of our sourcing. So that by being invested in these actions, we actually can attract and retain talent within our own workforce. It's also about responding to client expectations, obviously, and helping us to retain and win business. It's about meeting investor expectations. We have an increasing amount of investor questioning about supply chain issues, whereas in the past they would be focused on things. And last but very not least, it's about really making sure that we're working to our company's values. That's why I would say those at the beginning. So that's really where we're coming from with all that. So you can see that cost is not always, by any means, the driver behind what we do.
Excellent, great. Well, that's very helpful. I think yes, I think that really demonstrates the complexity that you're facing within the supply chain, and especially when you talk about end-to-end, that is one of the biggest challenges that that companies have, because that introduces a lot of complexity. But obviously it makes sense because as a consumer of your services, that's what you're seeing. You're consuming the fish in the restaurant, so you're wondering where that's coming from, for example. So you can completely understand why that view is very important. Alina, would you have a response to that as well?
Sure. I mean, I do agree with Lesley. I think companies have started by defining the supply chain just focused on their production and supply activities, but they realize they also have to plan for those activities, and they realize the logistics of it, the distribution also needs to be included, because many times decisions related to the selection of the suppliers determine how far away your products are from the customers. And so the distribution piece needs to be included, and then the actual use of the product needs to be included, because if you're going to provide support for your products while the customers are using them, then you need a way of reaching those customers. And sometimes you have to deal with returns, you have to deal with recalls, and you have to deal with a reverse supply chain as well. So once you start looking at the supply chain end-to-end, I think the next step for companies who are looking at this proactively is, as Lesley said, to look at innovation and bring in the design processes into your definition of end-to-end supply chain. Because, in fact, if you are taking a sustainability perspective, you have two options. You can design or redesign your supply chain for existing products and make the supply chain more sustainable, or you can also redesign your products so that from the beginning the products and the associated supply chain are more sustainable.
Excellent. Yeah, and that certainly speaks to this question of bringing in innovation driven by decisions in the supply chain, driven by changes in product design and service design perhaps as well. So very clear links there to value creation. Great. Okay, so we've started to get some questions coming through now from the YouTube chat. We had one that was relating to how you might work with companies to set up CSR policies and initiatives. This was particularly for Lesley from Giuseppe, who's basically asking, how do you help your suppliers set up their own policies and initiatives?
Well, on each of the areas that we work on, we set charters. And those take various different forms. So we ask all of our suppliers, for example, to sign our SODEXO Supplier Code of Conduct, which lays out our requirements in terms of human rights, diversity, environment, those kinds of areas. And we try to tell our suppliers that they must communicate that code of conduct along the whole of their supply chain, so that it's not just our tier 1 suppliers, but the whole of our supply chain that's really applying principles throughout. And to help our suppliers to do that, we provide them with some tools. We have a supplier guide that we're just working on completing right now, and then we have a process whereby we will go and audit those suppliers. But what we really insist on when we carry out those audits is actually working with the supplier to identify a corrective action plan with them, and working with the supplier and helping them to implement that action plan, so that we're not just going in and auditing and saying, you're awful. We're actually going in and saying, okay, we found these areas where you need to make improvements. This is what we suggest, and agreeing with them on a time-bound action plan to make those improvements. Other examples will be to the seafood that I mentioned earlier. We have a sustainable seafood supplier charter, which is obviously particularly just for those suppliers who provide us with seafood. And we communicate to them about why it's important why there's an issue around seafood, why we ask them not to supply us with specific species, for example, why we ask them to try to work towards providing us with certified seafood. But we try to explain not only what we're asking for, but why we're asking for it. Since we started working on these subjects 6 years ago, we've seen a considerable development, but when we started 6 years ago, we started talking to the seafood suppliers. We really found that they weren't very aware of the fact that the seafood resources were vastly overfished, that their livelihoods were, to a large extent in danger, and we were really raising awareness quite considerably on that to help them understand why we have those asks with them, and also by doing that to help them then implement those asks with their other clients and try and, in our own small way, to have a sustainability impact not just for our own business but through a larger supply chain.
Excellent. That's a great answer. Thank you for those very precise and very interesting examples. We have another question which is about sort of balancing priorities a little bit, and I'm going to ask Alina this question. This comes from Gary, and he's asking what priority does sustainability get with buyers versus sustainability balanced against price, quality and delivery. So from a process point of view, if you're managing the supply chain, obviously there are KPIs, metrics. So in your view, how do companies balance these different kind of trade-offs or priorities?
I think one of the ways you can actually balance the trade-offs and the priorities is to actually to consider them together. In many instances, companies would say, well, cost is very important, so we're going to make decision based on cost. But if you're not bringing in the other KPIs into the discussion, you're not going to actually be able to see the entire value chain impact. So I have actually chaired a sustainability symposium at Bentley in October, and we had presentations from many faculty at Bentley. And one that struck me that is particularly relevant for this subject was a presentation that was proposing to actually include the sustainability criteria in any business decision and consider them with an appropriate weight in the decision-making process. So you can do this in a I would say in a simple way, just by working with the multi-criteria decision matrix, where each decision criterion gets a weight, and the weight is established by the company based on their focus on sustainability, on cost, on strategic issues, and so on. And so the weights can be different from company to company, but once they are established, then they can be communicated with within the company, and then they can be used for all decision-making purposes. You can also take this to a higher level and put the sustainability criteria directly into your supply chain planning software and use it for optimization purposes if you want it to become more sophisticated. But I think the key is, as Lesley said before, the key is education within your company and also outside your company with your suppliers and your customers, education about the importance of including this criteria in decision making. The more people know about it, the easier it will be to have those business conversations where sustainability is at the same level as cost, quality, and other considerations.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. That's. I think a lot of companies are on maybe still a rather steep part of the learning curve. So we have obviously leaders like SODEXO, but certainly the education part is still very much needed. I totally agree with that. So we've got some more questions coming through. And I think I'm going to roll these two of these together. So this is from Daniel. Now let me see. How can we reconfigure this question slightly? So he's asking, Lesley, I think this is a good one for you. How do you measure and rate sustainability of your suppliers, do you focus only on direct spend or also indirect spend? And he's saying tier 2, tier 3, but I think let's say in terms of your sort of different purchasing categories, how do you organize that kind of measurement and rating according to the different categories you might have? And then he's also asking how many suppliers you audit. So again, this is a question about, you know, how much you invest in supporting the supply chain. So how many do you audit? I guess that is a question about, you know, how do you decide who to audit and where to audit?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take the second question first. In terms of the number of suppliers we audit, we're actually on a pilot program at the moment, which is focused on our uniforms category. And what we've done there is to start out by auditing all of the tier 1 suppliers, and then working with those tier 1 suppliers to be able to audit the tier 2 suppliers. And what we're doing is, based on that pilot, then looking at our other purchasing categories to set out a 10-year plan. Because we have, as I said, a vast supply chain, we're working on a 10-year plan on how we can expand that audit program to the other categories. Having said that, what we're very conscious of is avoiding audit fatigue, because what we find is that there's obviously a large number of other companies out there who are auditing on the same questions as we are. And what we're trying to do is also work on a way to have an intelligent process whereby, you know, if a supplier is already certified social responsibility, for example, then we'll consider that they don't need to be audited. If they've already been audited by another client, then as long as the audit process seems credible, we'll also avoid so on. And so we're looking at collaborative programs, trying to mutualize that kind of stuff. Because we have a massive supply chain and we only have a limited resource, so we have to work on a way to use that. In terms of how we allocate resource, we're very much looking at kind of a obviously spend is one factor in that, because the more you spend on a category, in general, the higher risk you have in terms of the amount of supply that you have. But there's other aspects which can temper that. So if we have a supply chain set up, for example, on a worldwide basis, and that we're managing from head office, there'll be a very high risk attached to that, because that one single supply chain can be supplying all our countries, whereas other supply chains might be much more local, fragmented. There's other aspects such as consumer and media interest, with things around reputational risks. And as mentioned right at the beginning, we're also very interested in of supply. So there's an issue around material risk, availability, making sure that we have those parts of our supply chain also kind of prioritized in we work.
Okay, great. That's very clear. So we have another question here from Pamela. So this is about the measurement of impact and outcomes of innovative and sustainable actions through consumer satisfaction sold products. So what's the actual impact of these investments? I'm going to ask Alina to have a little think about this question. Perhaps you've got some ideas about how we can sort of justify the investments we might make in the supply chain from the kind of consumer side, from the impact on revenue, etc. What's your feeling about that, Alina?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, some companies already have feedback from consumers regarding consumer preferences for sustainable business practices, and those companies, I think, are in an easy decision-making situations because they can take action based on this feedback. But I think in most situations, companies do not know what consumers need. And so one way to understand if sustainability makes sense from a consumer perspective is actually engage your customers in the product design process from the beginning, and then engage your customers to express their unmet needs related to sustainability. In many cases, they might not be what we think in general sustainability is. Perhaps consumers have needs related to the use of the product the company has never considered before. And in fact, if you look at a product like clothing, a lot of the environmental impact happens during the use of the product rather than during the production and the transportation of the products. So creating products that enable consumers to engage in sustainable behavior during use would be a way for a company to create value, to differentiate itself from competitors, and also benefit in the process because more consumers are going to buy the company's product.
So that links into the idea, I guess, of maintaining the clothing, washing the clothing, etc. What sort of impact that might have, I suppose. Is that something that SODEXO has thought about? You said that clothing was or personal protection equipment, for example, things like that. Are these sort of issues that you're facing?
Well, we obviously do have a large amount of uniforms within our own business. For the moment, we're focused more on the raw material sourcing part of that than the actual use afterwards. But we will obviously get to that in a second stage. In terms of the use of our other products, we're not so much in that because we're not a Unilever or a Marks and Spencer's or somebody. People are taking our products home. We're actually buying the products to create our own service with them and providing that service to the consumer while they're on our premises. So we're kind of in a little bit of a different situation. We are in a situation where we're almost choice editing for the consumer because you know, we're not giving the choice to the consumer between serving them sustainable salmon or serving them unsustainable salmon. When they come into our restaurant, they are offered a salmon dish, and we have to make sure that that salmon is sustainable as a company. What we try to do is to assess whether our consumers are understanding the efforts that we're going to. And we have a huge amount of consumer research goes on client sites that show that our consumers are, we have some questions around two areas where they're satisfied with the sustainability of the meals that they are provided, and we have quite good response levels on that, although you know you can always do better. And we also ask them questions around the environmental practices on the sites that we have. So you know we have initiatives to help them to reduce the serviettes they take, to sort their waste at the end of their meal, that kind of thing. And we also get quite good responses around those activities as well. So we are trying to measure our consumer reactions. But I guess our responsibility, as I said, is because we're choice editing, we're more trying to educate our consumers about why we're making the choices for them that we have made, in the hope that they will then kind of apply that behaviour in their own behaviour as well, outside of the work.
That's very interesting because you know, typical supply chain actions tend to kind of look mainly upstream, but of course you do have an influence downstream even with customers. So I think that's a very important point to make. That's excellent. We have a question for you, Lesley, from Helen, and she's asking, and I think I know the answer to this, about would you say you encourage or force your suppliers I guess, to comply to your standards, etc.?
I'd say we very much encourage them. We tend to have quite long-term relationships with our suppliers, so it gives us the ability to work with them over the long term, and we really try to work with them in a collaborative way to put these practices into place. Often they're not simple things to do, they take time. If you take I've already talked about sustainable seafood, so maybe if we talk about sustainable palm oil, for example, we're working with all of our frying oil and margarine suppliers throughout the world to move them onto physical certified sustainable palm oil in our supply chain. And depending on which part of the world you're in, that's more or less complicated to achieve. So it's really kind of about taking a long-term approach and trying to help those suppliers where it's not easy to find that sourcing and to be able to put it into place.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And I think that's a very good point you make there about the long-term approach, the improvement approach, the assumption that we have to move in the direction of improvement and not necessarily expect all our suppliers to comply straight away, or even say, okay, we're not going to work with these suppliers, we'll work with a whole new set of suppliers. That's just not possible for most companies.
That's actually just not possible, and also we believe it's really not responsible, because if as a company you move away from a supply chain because you identify that there's an issue, you've done nothing to actually help resolve the issues, because all that will happen is that that supply will go somewhere else to somebody who's less ethical or integral than you are, and so you're just leaving the problem there for somebody else to deal or not to deal with it. So we very much believe that our responsibility is to work with that supply chain, with those suppliers, to try and resolve the issues and to try and work along, and help to drive improvement. We like to say it's a journey. It's a long journey, but every month, every year, we make steps along the road. So.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, that certainly supports what seems to be happening in many sectors today, moving away from this knee-jerk reaction to looking at it as a long-term investment. So Alina, we have a question which I think we can pose to you, which is around the barriers that supply chain departments might face in implementing sustainable supply chain management. It's not easy to do. As we've already said, you've got to balance a number of different priorities. So what do you see as the main sort of barriers that supply chain departments have to overcome?
Sure. So I think we mentioned cost before, and cost is front and center in these types of discussions. I think the first question that supply chain manager will ask is exactly how much more is it going to cost me if I am going to have to now select suppliers who follow sustainability practices. So I think that's one of the barriers that can be eliminated through education throughout the company. It has to come from the top. If sustainability is an integral part of the strategy of the company, then that message has to be communicated and adopted and embraced by the supply chain management department. But I think these types of challenges are easier to deal with internally. I think the external challenge then working with suppliers is much, much bigger, as Lesley was mentioning, and a great deal of education is required there. But I think companies don't have to look at power, and one of the questions before said forcing. They don't have to look at these terms in a negative way. If you take, for example, Walmart, Walmart has a program in which they bring in sustainability or other types of supply chain initiatives. They announce them, they announce a date for implementation, and then they also force their top 100 suppliers to implement those initiatives And so with enough education and with enough advance notice, I think there's an opportunity here for companies to work in a collaborative way with suppliers to help them move into a more sustainable direction. And so then everybody benefits. It's not just the manufacturer, but the suppliers, and then the suppliers themselves can work in a similar fashion with their tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in the chain. So it's really important to understand that companies have a responsibility to use their power in the supply chain in an ethical way, and a large company can in fact encourage the adoption of sustainable business practices in a positive way rather than by enforcing standards that only have a benefit for that particular company.
Right, exactly, and that's interesting. You say that about using that influence to bring up the standards across the supply base, doing that in a collaborative way. This gets to another question which Gary's posing here, which I think is pretty fundamental, and I think most companies would recognise they're not going to solve these problems all on their own. And you already mentioned, Lesley, that where you see suppliers have already been audited by maybe a competitor or another company, you'll look at that and see if you can use that instead of having to make them go through this mill of the audit again and again, so to avoid this sort of fatigue issue that you raised. So there's a question here about, do you work with any industry groups to share audits to an industry standard, or to kind of collaboratively share the burden, let's say, of trying to improve the standards?
Yeah, that leads me really nicely into a collaborative initiative that we've been working on for the last 3 years at SODEXO. We're a board member of an initiative called Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative, and that's a multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together the FAO, NGOs, the German Development Bank, a number of harvesters and producers, as well as retailers, and SODEXO as a food service company in this instance. And what we've been working to do is to take the FAO guidelines for sustainable seafood eco-labeling programs, and to use those to create a benchmark whereby we're benchmarking the more than 140 different sustainable seafood certification programs that exist out on the seafood market today, to try and ascertain which ones are credible and which ones are not credible. And the aim of doing that is to allow buyers and also the seafood producers themselves, whether they be fisheries or aquaculture, farmed fish producers, to know and understand which of the certification programs are credible, so that instead of, again, many buyers coming in and asking those farms, for example, to have 10, 11, 12 different certification programs in place, and which means 10, 11, 12 different audits, we can say, okay, we've benchmarked this certification program, we know that it's credible. If the farmer has that one, then we'll accept it, and we don't require them then to go and have another one done. And for the producer themselves, things easier. For the buyer, it makes things easier. And it's not a consumer-facing program, but in the end, it will also make things easier for consumers, because I think that they will only see a more limited number of certification programs out there, and at least they'll know that the ones that they do see in the long term will be credible ones, because the other ones just won't exist anymore, because they don't use them. So that's a very good example of a multi-stakeholder collaborative program trying to work to reduce the burdens and the costs of sustainability.
And do you see that generalizing across other purchasing categories, or is it rather more limited to these high priority resource risky areas?
I think it's something that can be generalized. There's certainly a major need for it. Probably the sustainable seafood education is the one where there was the greatest proliferation and the complication. But so far we've only tackled the environmental certification programs. We're also looking at now maybe taking that further and looking at fishery improvement projects and how those are defined, or trying to do something with the social standards piece of it. So that's even just within seafood. There's still a lot more work to be done. And then you can look at maybe doing it also, some of the other areas like coffee or cotton, where there's again a large number of programs out there that it's difficult to know what's credible and what's not credible.
Excellent, great. Well, I think we're almost at the end of our allotted time, so I think we've had a fantastic opportunity to explore many of these issues, and as you mentioned, I think we're clearly only touching the tip of the iceberg here in terms of what sort of projects are in place, even within one company or one part of the supply chain. So what I will encourage the rest of the people involved, the participants watching this, who are participating in our MOOC, is to explore those issues more in our discussion board. We'll be able to provide more responses, and between yourselves, I think also you'll be able to provide some very interesting responses to already the questions that we've had posted here, but also many others. So I'd like to thank Lesley and Alina for spending their valuable time with us today. I think it's been great that we've had some different perspectives, and I think we've had a very rich discussion there, and this is recorded, so people will be able to review some of these topics and explore them further as they wish, I think, afterwards. So thank you very much for your time, and wish you best of luck in your various journeys, as you say, in sustainability and putting sustainability into our education programs at Bentley, for example, and wish you luck in SODEXO in the long journey you have there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.